There's different forms of service that as believers we can engage in. When we come to the book of 2 Corinthians, he's going to refer to a service that involves giving to material needs that believers have. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 7, is Paul talking to the Corinthians about his relationship to them. He says, "Or did I commit a sin, or did I sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preached the gospel of God to you without charge. I did it as a gift. I robbed other churches by taking wages here from them to serve you." And he's looking at diakonia as ministry of taking care of these people, bringing the good news to them. That was one of the first things he did. And then staying on. The church in Corinth is one of the churches that Paul spent a longer period of time in. In Ephesus, he was there for over 2 years. In Corinth, he was there for around 18 months. So he spent quite a bit of time with these people, not only evangelizing them, but then teaching them. But he took wages from these other people. So we're going to look at this word. This word for service here is the word diakonia. Diakonia is a term that in terms of the service words, if you remember from our first day, is kind of a common service. It's not that there's just one person in charge that you're serving to. It could be a multitude of people. And so this is a good way of Paul looking at this, that he was serving a multitude of people that made up the body of Christ, or that part of the body of Christ, I should say, in the city of Corinth. We're going to look a little bit at thinking about he's done this. We're going to come back to this in another study, but I want to jump from this and look at the way Paul refers to other people helping in this matter. He says, I took wages from other churches. Pastor Tim Holstrom, we're looking at different ideas of Christian service and a proper attitude. And if we jump back in the same letter to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul says, "Now, brothers, we wish you to make known to you the grace of God that was given in or among the churches of Macedonia." Keep that in mind, Macedonia. If you don't know where Macedonia is, if you looked on a map, you'd find Greece, which is where Corinth was. And if you went north of Greece, just up above that, the Aegean Sea, Macedonia was up there on that north side. So he says, Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy, and their, I always find this very interesting. He's looking at this, their deep poverty. Now, I grew up in a family where, we didn't have a lot. My dad worked hard. My dad taught school for many, many years and did all kinds of other jobs on the side. But I would be honest, the only reason I felt poor was that, well, we didn't get to go on some of the trips that some of my friends did. And man, for a long time, we didn't own a snowmobile. Isn't it crazy the things that you use to gauge yourself to say, well, they have, and I must be poor because we don't? Aside from foolish things like that, I never grew up feeling like we were poor. We had a roof over our head. We had clothes. We ate. I never worried that, oh, maybe we won't eat next month. And I just point this out because when we're talking about poverty, I think probably most of you that are listening to this, probably none of you are like got cash falling out your pockets, and you just don't know what to do with all the money you have. Yeah, sure. Most of us probably aren't there. But are any of you worried about whether you're going to eat next month? And you've probably heard me say this on this channel because I'm always just trying to put this in perspective, that when we think of poverty or being poor, it's really easy for us to think of poverty in terms of what we can and can't do. I don't get to take trips. I don't get to just run off and do this thing. Those are, you've probably heard people use this line of, or this kind of a statement, but that's a first world problem. That's for us among a well-developed nation that has a massive system by which, there's all kinds of provisions that this government makes available to people and all kinds of things like that. And most people are, to be honest, most people are fairly successful. They have have solid jobs. I realize that we have people that don't. But and I'm not here to talk about that. But just trying to put it in perspective that it's really easy for us to spend time when you have moved up this ladder within the realm of wealth within the world, that now you begin to gauge yourself against those people that make more than you and what they get to do that you don't get to do. And that's not a definition of poverty. Poverty is based on the fact that you do not have adequate clothing for the season that you're in. I live in an area that's very agricultural, and we have a lot of people that do work all summer long out in fields or orchards, and more particularly. And as they work out there, they also have to be adequately clothed. They have to protect themselves from the hot, blistering summer sun. Come to really appreciate that. So there's adequate clothing. And then right now it's winter, and where I am, it's pretty cold, and our nights are very cold, and it's been much, much colder in previous years than it is this particular winter. But that's adequate clothing. It needs to be adequate food that we actually can eat, that we actually have food to be able to sustain us. And most of us aren't worried about whether we're going to eat tomorrow or whether we're going to be able to eat next week or even next month. And I would say most of you aren't worried about whether you're going to be able to buy food for yourself and your family in 6 months or even a year. That's not a concern. So I'm just trying to put in perspective when we talk about our deep poverty or their deep poverty. Be very careful about how you think of this. To be in deep poverty means they maybe don't have the wherewithal to acquire better clothing. They maybe do not have the ability to know whether they're going to be able to feed their family tomorrow. And he says these people, even in their deep poverty, it says it overflowed in the wealth of their generosity. Now, generosity for them might be different than what generosity would look like for you and I, where we actually have probably more significant amount of substance, and for us to be generous, it's going to be more, right? For them, maybe what we would look at and kind of, well, they didn't hardly give anything. But if they gave something out of their poverty, remember the widow? Yeah, in the Gospels, and all these people are going in there putting in their great amount, and Jesus says, well, they gave out of their wealth. She gave 2 small coins, and he says that was pretty much all she had. Now, Jesus could know that. The disciples didn't know that was all that she had. And so these people are giving out of their poverty, and even the small amount that they give might seem to be something. Again, this is Macedonia. And what they're doing, I want to keep reading now, verse 3, for I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability. Now, we have a church in our area, and quite a number of years ago, there were some people in that church that ended up claiming bankruptcy, and the church had to return funds that they had given because they had given with credit cards, and they could track that giving to that church. They gave beyond what was considered a legal ability. These people don't have credit cards. So to go beyond their ability is to say, and you've probably heard me say this before, but right now we're eating rice and beans, and next week all we're going to be able to eat is rice because we're going to help these people. I really don't know completely. I'm just trying to give you a picture of what it meant that they were giving. To give beyond their ability doesn't mean that they give what they don't have. It means that they're giving what they actually need for themselves. Does that make sense? They gave of their own accord. In other words, this wasn't foisted on them. Paul didn't have some rousing message where he's dig deep, dig deep. There's all kinds of preachers that are going to want people to give to the church and all of this stuff, and giving to the church in some of those things is like, well, give to me. It would be that kind of idea. And so I think we need to be very cautious of this. And it says they were begging, or literally supplicating, asking us with much encouragement for the grace of this participation or fellowship in the support. And this is our word diakonia again, this ministry of the saints. And he says, and this they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves to the Lord and then to us. So they gave a material gift, but they also were giving themselves. Now, is that giving themselves, is that something additional, or is it saying that they were willing to put themselves on the line to provide for these people, and they had done that before they ever got around to this material gift? And I think that that's a way that he's referring to this, that they were dedicated to the Lord, and they were dedicated to helping Paul and these other believers, and the way they supported was just one expression of that, sending this support to saints. And these saints are saints in Judea, and they are poor also, poor due to a very severe famine that had hit that part of the land, as well as probably a lot of ostracization, because most of those believers down there were Jews. I want to go over to Acts chapter 16 and verse 12, and it says, and from there, they went to, this is talking about Paul and his companions as they're traveling on their second apostolic trip. It says they went there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia. So Philippi is a part of Macedonia. I want to go to Philippians chapter 4. Verse 15, he says, you yourselves also know, Philippians, that at the first preaching of the gospel, after I left Macedonia, because Macedonia is where they were, there was no church that shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, but you alone. In other words, you guys actually provided for me in what I was doing. For even in Thessalonica, you sent a gift to me more than once. Now that's when he's writing the Philippians. He says that you did this. But if we went back to 2 Corinthians 11, Paul says, I robbed other churches by taking wages from them to serve you. So in other words, other churches were helping provide for Paul. Now, Paul did have a habit of working. He almost always carried on a secular job. He did that to provide for himself and the others that were with him. But they also received help from other churches to say, hey, we're going to help take care of you so that you can dedicate more time to the service that you have. And this is the point of this is part of ministry or service of a believer, is to see that there are people that we can take care of. Yeah, you can take care of pastors and leaders in your church like that allows them to give more time to the study of the Word and to leading the church in those matters. That is something that you can do. But the early church, and I think this is something that it's easy for us to neglect, the early church really looked out for each other, not just for their leadership, not just for their pastors or the apostles or people like this, but also they were looking out for people that, let's say they're working hard. Maybe they're working 15 hours a day, but they're just not making enough to be able to feed their family of 5 or 6 or 7. And you say, well, don't have so many kids. Well, that was life, and that was married life in their world. And we can think whatever we want from a modern point of view. But the point is here, that's what God had for them. That's what God allowed for them. And the other people in the church helped. The other people in the church helped. And I think that that's very important for us as believers to think about what that means to really be involved in helping other believers. A lot of Christians don't read this right, and they look sometimes as though our job is to be out there as a church feeding the poor in our community and such. This is not. This is the service of believers to believers. These churches and these believers helping other people that are believers, that have real legitimate needs. Not that they can't afford their trip to Hawaii, so let's send them to... No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, they're having a tough time just paying their grocery bill. Probably some of you in the last few years, as you've watched the price of groceries go up, you're probably like, I can see how that would be tough, raising a family today with the cost of food. And the cost of rent for people is going up. And so there's all kinds of things that we find today that are real needs that maybe even there's people around us. And we don't want to make them dependent on those kind of resources in the way that many people have learned to become dependent on the government. But you do want to be those that do step up and help them when there's a real need, and you can help them get through those things. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about economics. I probably delved into some things or messed with some stuff we shouldn't do, but this is a type of ministry. This is one type of service. John even mentions this over in 1 John chapter 3 about you have the wherewithal of this world. some people lack. You see it. The implication is you ought to meet it. If you don't, well, John questions how well you know God and how well you really understand his love. So here we go, serving other believers by using what God's given us to meet real needs. Don't send anything to me. I don't need those things. I'm not asking for any money because God takes care of us. God provides for us. And so we're fine. But maybe there's believers where you are, around you, that maybe need some real help. And maybe with the little bit or the much that you might have, maybe you can be used in their lives to serve them, to serve God by using those kinds of things. We'll come back to 2 Corinthians because I also want to talk about Paul's service to the Corinthians. And we'll look at that. So thinking about other believers and another way that we can have Christian love for others in the body of Christ, Christian service that is pleasing to God. Think about those things and who you are with them. And as always, thank you for joining me today.